Welcome to Insight is Capital, where we explore the minds behind successful investing. Today, I'm especially thrilled to introduce my guest, Dr. Todd Finkle, who has dedicated nearly 2 decades to researching and understanding one of the most influential and entrepreneurial figures in modern American business. Dr. Finkle is the Pigott Professor of Entrepreneurship at Gonzaga University and the author of the now internationally acclaimed book, Warren Buffett, Investor and Entrepreneur. His book has been translated into 13 languages, bringing Buffett's wisdom to readers around the world. What makes Dr. Finkle's perspective and his book truly unique is his personal connection to the Buffett family and his many experiences taking students to meet Warren Buffett in person. These interactions provided him with invaluable insights that go beyond what's found in other Warren Buffett bios, public records, or for that matter, even Berkshire Hathaway's annual letters and statements. So let's dive in and get Dr. Finkle's unique perspective and insights on Warren Buffett.
This is the Insight is Capital podcast.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the individual guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of advisoranalyst.com or of our guests. This broadcast is meant to be for informational purposes only. Nothing discussed in this broadcast is intended to be considered as advice.
Dr. Todd Finkle, welcome to the show and thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, Pierre. I'm happy to be here and share Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger's wisdom today. We can't forget about Charlie.
Well, so honored to have you, Dr. Finkle. Thank you so much for your precious time. I think to begin, maybe tell us a little bit or as much about your backstory on this. Where does it all begin? How did you first become interested in Warren Buffett and his investment philosophy and his life for that matter? I think one thing before we get started, I would say is that you really managed to capture more of the soul of Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett, the person, Warren Buffett, the entrepreneur, and not just Warren Buffett, the greatest investor in the world, right? So what prompted all of this?
No, that's interesting that you said that because most of the other books don't hit on that.
Right.
They talk about his valuation and money and things of that nature, which is important, granted, but at his soul, that's really what Warren's about. Is I've taken 6 groups of students to go visit him, and at the end, every time I asked them what was the biggest thing that they learned from going to visit Warren Buffett, and they would always say, how to live your life. They
Right.
wouldn't say, oh, I can make a lot of money. It was so much more. Um, and even for me as well, I've changed definitely by writing this book, not only financially, but personally too, on a personal level. Like one of my favorite ones is Charlie Munger. All right, I'm already getting into Charlie here, but one of my favorite things that Charlie left us before he passed away last year was don't hang around with toxic people
Right.
and get yourself into toxic situations. And that has resonated with me so hard that I think to myself, okay, do I need this person in my life who's causing this chaos? Why am I doing this to myself? And I think back to Charlie and what Charlie would do. But that's just one of the things, the many things. And another thing that they both uh, uh, talked about all the time was just that they will speak no ill of any man, but only good. And in all my dealings with Warren and all these shareholder meetings I've been to, like 15 of them, I've never heard him say anything negative about anybody.
Right.
He's always positive and he's always upbeat. Now, Charlie, on the other hand, I
Yeah.
wouldn't say is always like that because I've seen him attack Elon Musk. Um, but that's something that really resonated with me as well.
I bet.
Don't stab people in the back. That's basically what they're
Well,
saying.
no, that was the thing. I think like one thing that came out in another conversation that I had regarding Warren Buffett was that even in his what appeared to be proxy fights, he never went like a corporate raider into proxy situations or influential situations where, like for example, if you look at the acquisition, I think, of Oxy and Vicky Golub, the interesting thing that happened there was that he influenced the outcome of his relationship with Oxy by writing about it, that Vicky Golub was promising to pay out the profits back to shareholders, right? And so he said that in one of his presentation slides and in his letter, that this was Vicky Golub's commitment to the owners of the company, to the shareholders, which is that, they would pay out. And that was the premise of his investment in Oxy in the first place, which was that we would invest, they would invest X, number, billions of dollars into this company. And then the CEO would make good on the commitment that she had made, right? So when you look at how how he went about that, he didn't do that at a shareholders meeting of Oxy. He did it through letters, through his word, and that the people involved, in this case it was the CEO, would be good for her word as well. And that's what we're counting on, because she's an honest player. So it was always a very constructive, positive sort of outcome. That was something that's always struck me about Buffett's character, is that he's
a very humble guy, funny.
Yeah,
He always
definitely.
has something funny to say, especially when he first starts a conversation or a meeting. He'll say something funny. Very down to earth. He cares about people. I interviewed his daughter, Susie, for the book, and I didn't put a lot of stuff she said in the book, but I can share just a little bit with you.
Mm-hmm.
She was saying that every night at dinner, because he was always there at dinner every night, um, they had somebody from a disadvantaged background at the table because her mom, Susan,
Right.
um, really cared about the community and wanted to help the community. And so they always had somebody from a disadvantaged background at dinner. And that's what she remembered the most. And she would
Right.
share that with me. And she said Warren is really into social justice, women's rights, and the whole uh, the disparity with money and the rich and the poor. He doesn't like that. And he's come out and he's said that before. But she just reaffirmed all of that stuff. And she also, it was interesting talking to her because she said, she runs two foundations. And Warren, who was going to give all of his money to the Gates Foundation, is now giving it to her.
Oh,
He's getting all this money.
wow.
Yeah. And I think it's called the Sherwood Foundation. Um, so she's got a lot of responsibility.
Yeah,
And
that's a huge responsibility. Yeah.
yeah, she's got a lot of struts on her. It took me a while to get a hold of her. But it was interesting talking to her. See, what else can I tell you? She was telling me um, about how she came home from school and there was a big sucker when she was like 9 years old, a big sucker on the table and a dress for her. And Warren took her to a ballet.
That's nice.
That was one of her funny stories. But she's really good friends with Bono of you.
Okay.
And so when Bono comes into town, he stays with her and she's married to a musician, and they'll jam over at her house together. And I imagine, I didn't ask her, but I imagine that he's working with her on a lot of these various foundation.
Right.
And
On the charitable stuff. Yeah.
yeah, he's really into that. So,
Amazing. Dr. Finkel, take us back to Omaha. I mean, this is your hometown. I mean, one thing that struck me was that, um, you're from Omaha, Nebraska as well, and you you all went to the same school. The same you all went to the same public high school, or open high school, right? In Omaha. That's something that you have in common with not only the children, Warren Buffett's children, but Charlie Munger as well.
Charlie Munger and Buffett's grandkids
Right.
went there as well. I think how we
So talk about that. Talk about the connection, the family connection that's there between yourself and the Buffett family, and maybe let's lay the groundwork for how you eventually came to write this book and everything that came after.
yeah, I actually went to junior high with Pete Buffett.
Right.
Um, and then we both went on to Central High, which is the open school, and it was renowned for its math. And Warren, when I wrote my book, I did everything wrong when I wrote the book. I was a complete rebel entrepreneur when I wrote the book. And I'll talk about that later. But um, when I sent him the book, he said, "Oh, I'm so happy that somebody from Omaha that knows the family before they were famous
Right.
and rich is writing a book about me, because it gives a different perspective on him rather than somebody from New York, you know. But Pete at Central, I knew him. I used to eat lunch with him every day with a whole group of guys, all really bright guys.
Right.
My guess is that Warren taught him at a very young age, hang around with people that are better than you, like he does to all of
Which
us
is
now.
terrific advice. Yeah.
And he hung around with all these really smart guys at our lunch table, and one of them went on to be the CEO of a public company in Silicon Valley, who used to drive me to school every day. I won't mention his name, but yeah, and none of us knew anything about his dad. And I don't think he knew, because his dad was very secretive. I think that he thought when he said he was a securities analyst that he meant securing buildings. Is what
Right.
I've heard him say.
That's
So,
hilarious. Okay, that is
but
hilarious.
no, he wore a baseball cap. He wore ripped up jeans to school every day, but he was very into the arts. He loved photography, and he loved music, and of course, he went on to become a Grammy award-winning artist. Yeah,
Really? That's
yeah,
fantastic.
he did. So, yeah, that was my initial exposure to them. Berkshire at that time, I think, was $69 a share. And of course, now, what is it? $700,000 a share,
Yeah.
something like that. But yeah, none of us knew. Uh, and that was my initial exposure to the Buffett family. My brother knew Howie Buffett, who was, 5 years older than me. They both went to school together. And my cousin knew Susie Buffett, who was, I believe, 7 years older than me. And they went to Central as well. And that was my connection to Susie, was through my
Right.
cousin Steve Nog. So I was lucky I utilized different connections, and I had people that this wasn't just an individual effort. When you put something of this magnitude together, you just have to really utilize your network and be a good entrepreneur. So I had a couple people that really helped me. Charlie Fishkin, that I've known since I was 9, who's written a couple books, worked on Wall Street. He helped me with that. And another friend of mine who was a CFA that helped me with the valuation part of
Right.
the book. So that really helped out a lot. And his name was Matt Koffler. But yeah, so that was my initial exposure to them, and I can
I,
go on and talk more.
yeah, of course.
I'll let you ask a question.
I just want to say, I find it actually hilarious that, Warren Buffett's children, and very true to life. I mean, when you're a child, when you're young and, mom and dad are at home and they do what they do, you kind of take it for granted. Right. And it wasn't like they were, they weren't, they were, he was very successful already in his own right at that time, but he was very quiet. He was very quiet about it. If you ask somebody, would you rather be famous or rich or both? Most most people, most people would, a lot of people would say, yeah, of course, I'd love to be famous. Um, I'd love to be rich. You know, I think for most, I have a feeling that for most entrepreneurs, the real desire, and in being an entrepreneur as well, um, the real wish is to be quietly rich. What child wouldn't take that for granted? Not really like understand or fully grasp, my dad is one of the greatest investors in the world. They just,
No,
they see their dad every day and they just take it for granted, right?
I'll tell you another Charlie quip here.
Yeah.
Charlie says, and I'm sure Buffett has the same philosophy, that you should talk about your failures and keep your successes quiet.
Right. And
That's another thing I learned from these guys. So I try not to do that.
it's terrific advice because talking about how successful you are is a magnet for envy. You know, I mean, so there's so much wrapped up in that. I mean, you shouldn't do it anyway, but there's so much wrapped up in the outcome of doing that. Whereas, even like when we, because we have a lot of conversations with seasoned investing, portfolio managers, hedge fund managers, people from around the business, and by far, the most common thread that comes through, especially in money management circles, the more seasoned you are, the more likely you are to talk about your mistakes. People who have been around the business for a couple of decades, 3 decades, the really seasoned ones, seasoned investors, they're more apt to talk about the mistakes they made because it's the mistakes that resonate with them. It's not the successes are great, but it's the mistakes that define their personality as investors, right? And we'll get into that because I know
Prospect theory.
yeah, exactly. I'd love to. I know you devoted a chapter to some of Warren Buffett's failures, and which we can get into in our conversation. So it's interesting. You grew up with you went to school with you went to junior high and high school with Pete Buffett, and you didn't know. I mean, you know you didn't know that Pete Buffett's dad was Warren Buffett, that he was the Warren Buffett, and
Wasn't Warren Buffett
no.
back then?
See, he was rich, but not famous, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly.
the infamy and the fame, the famous aspect of being Warren Buffett came substantially later on in the 80s and 90s. It started to pick up steam in the 80s and 90s, especially in the 90s. Where more and more press was featuring stories about the enormous success of Berkshire Hathaway. And it's ironic because you do point out in your chapter on failures that Berkshire Hathaway was ironically his biggest mistake.
Definitely.
And I love that. I love the yin yang of that, because while it was his biggest mistake, it's also, the namesake of his greatest success, right? And so I'd love to get into that with you. But talk about, maybe we can get into the entrepreneurial side of Warren Buffett. I'd love for you to talk about that, because it really goes to the heart of Warren Buffett, the investor, and his mindset.
I mean, when you're writing a book about Warren Buffett, there's been a lot of books that have been written, so I really had to think about how I was going to differentiate my book from everybody else. And it took me a long time to even actually do it,
Right.
to really believe that I could write a book that people would buy. And, it took me a total of 14 years to do the book. So 9 years of going and hanging out with Warren Buffett with my students and writing articles about it and doing research and talking to people. Then 5 years straight of writing, off
Right.
until 3 o'clock in the morning, and to learn about the whole publishing industry and how it works. There is a methodology there that I didn't follow.
Right.
And, I wrote the book ahead of time. Most people go get an agent and then they go to a publisher. I didn't get an agent. I talked to some agents, including the one that was in charge of security analysis, the sixth edition. I talked to her and she wanted
Right.
to be my agent, but there was some money issues there, and I just didn't think it was worthwhile. I just thought that I could be the agent. I didn't need somebody else to do that and take 15% or whatever she was going to charge me. Um, so I had to learn everything. I had to learn about query letters and proposals, and then I had to have enough guts to talk to all these big shots and get slammed down
Right.
because they said, "Okay, we'll do it if you get Warren Buffett to write the preface." And so I tried to get Warren to do it,
Right.
but Warren wouldn't do it. He's
Right.
only done that like twice, and one was to the intelligent investor, and so that was never going to happen. Um, so the next step was down. I sent Warren the book. I sent Charlie the book with a box of See's candy,
Right.
the
Which is
peanut
the right
brittle,
thing. Yeah.
and I'm sure that they laughed. They were probably eating it that afternoon. Um, and I got positive feedback from Warren, and I didn't hear from Charlie, but I just assumed that if Warren said yes, it was a go.
Yeah.
So I was lucky to have Warren on my side, but I've been friends with Warren for a long time. So for
Yeah. I
14
mean,
years,
starting with your early attempts to get his attention, right? I mean, and talk about that. I mean, I think, this, um, you heard about an opportunity to take some of your students with you, uh, and meet Warren Buffett and spend the day with him, right? So
So I've never been traditional as a professor. As a matter of fact, I probably shouldn't have been a professor because I'm an entrepreneur and I never really fit in. And I would do these practical things like go out to companies and bring my students there. And
right.
when this opportunity came up from my cousin, he contacted me and said, "Hey, Todd, you need to bring your students to go visit Warren Buffett. He's inviting all these schools to Omaha." And I got on it right away, and I wrote a one-page letter because I assumed that he didn't want anything more than that. And I was doing this nonprofit with 6 other universities, and we won a national award. We were helping out kids to become entrepreneurs, and We got grant money and all this great stuff, that most
Right.
people weren't doing, and it didn't matter. I told him I knew Pete. I went to high school with Pete, and he
Yeah.
rejected me. It didn't matter because Warren, you have to earn. The list was years long.
Yeah.
The secretary said, "Don't even bother putting my name on the list because everybody wants to go."
Yeah.
And so I just thought, okay, I'm not going to put my name on the list, but I'm going to learn as much as I can about Warren Buffett because he's Warren Buffett. And I especially wanted to learn about his investment methodology, and I wanted to share that with the world about what he does. And that's everybody says it's all out there and everything, but most people don't know how he does it. Otherwise,
Right.
they'd all be rich.
It's yeah, and I would tend to agree with that as well. Without without even knowing, but having read several books and many of the annual letters from Berkshire Hathaway, it's still a black box. And you know, it can't, there's part of me, I laughed when you know, when you talked about sitting across from Warren Buffett at a lunch and asking him, how do you value a company? But I'm going to let you tell the story. You say to yourself, and having, and as an advisor who, sort of grew up digesting everything about Warren Buffett and then regurgitating it to my clients to get them on board with the idea that you could own stocks for the forever. You could buy great companies and own them for an indefinite amount of time. You ask yourself, can it really be that simple? Right? Right? Is it really just, that, or this business is such that the more you learn, the more you realize how little you know. And I think I'm quoting Socrates there, but the more you learn, the more you realize how little you actually know. Even if he did explain it, you'd still not be able to grasp it the way the grasp that he has, because some things are hard to explain or impossible to explain. They're nuanced.
I'll just say one point to that is the thing that Warren Buffett has that we don't is that he started working at 4 years old,
Right.
and now he's let's see, he'll be 94, so he has 90 years of business experience that he can build upon. That's a lot more than me.
Yeah, exactly.
Value that.
So talk about, that's a great segue. Talk about some of his early exploits.
Oh yeah, he started his first. Well, I think the key element before I get to that leads into that is his childhood.
Right.
And his family, when he was a year and a half old, the Great Depression hit. His father lost his job. The family lost all their money. His mother kind of went nuts, and she started taking out abuse on the kids and telling them they were worthless. And there was mental health issues in her side of the family. And so Warren, I when your parent, he loved his father, but he had problems with his mother his whole life.
Right.
And I think that's what pushed him personally is what I call the poverty effect. Growing up in poverty really affects you. And it's at that age where it's very, what do they call it? Imprinting in psychology. And
Right.
then he started to be a little entrepreneur and selling lemonade at 4 years old and selling stuff door to door, which I did too.
So we're talking 1934, right? 1934,
1934, he started
1935.
selling lemonade
This is
on the
young Warren Buffett,
yeah,
age 4 and 5,
yeah,
1934,
yeah.
1930s Omaha, right?
In the Depression, Great
Yeah.
Depression, he was doing this.
I mean, it wasn't just the Depression. There was the Dust Bowl too, right? There was a whole
Yeah.
there was a whole bunch of things. It was an awful time to
Yep.
grow up in America. There was, I mean, especially in the Midwest, not, maybe not so much in Manhattan or, but 1930s America was a cruel,
And Charlie would
yeah,
often talk about that.
yeah. And he was, I mean, 6 years older, right? 5 or 6 years older than
Yeah.
Warren. Yeah. Sorry, go on. I had to interject because I was thinking, 1934, what is that?
Yeah. Well, he did a ton of things. He he sold popcorn and peanuts, and he went to the racetrack and stooping, I think is what they call it, trying to find winning tickets, and he would give them to his aunt to turn in. And I did that too, by the way. And at Exarban, that was the
Yeah.
name of the racetrack there. That it was backwards for Nebraska, Exarban.
Right, and that Exarban that actually features later on as well in I think baseball.
Oh, he owned the Omaha Royals. He loves
Right.
baseball. Yeah. Yeah, he just did a whole bunch of entrepreneurial things. He read, finance books from his dad's business. Because his dad started a financial practice, and he was selling, I believe, bonds during the Great Depression. And Warren
Right.
would go down there and he'd read the books. He read, by the time he was 11, he read all the books in the Omaha Public Library on the stock market at 11.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, he wasn't a normal kid, obviously. He bought a farm, a 40-acre farm, by the time I think he was 13. He
Wow.
bought a used Rolls Royce, and he would rent it out for $35 a night. He had a chain of pinball machines with a partner, and they would put them into barbershops and split the profits 50-50. That was my favorite thing that he did.
Right.
What a great idea,
It absolutely. I mean, it's almost a scam, right? It's the greatest thing. Like
his greatest scam was getting into insurance. I mean,
yeah,
he's
I love
the money in insurance.
yeah, that's the cheekiness. Like I would say, in all the previous, it's interesting because in all the previous bios, the story of Warren Buffett almost always began, with his time in Washington, D.C., when his father was a congressman, right? So you didn't get the 1930s Depression aspect of it, like almost as though the authors of those books, it was too painful to talk about. Like it's just left out. Mostly I don't recall getting the childhood background, before let's say age 11 or 12 or 15 or whatever.
There might be one out there, maybe Kaufman's biography on Warren.
Right. Yeah, but it adds so much, that dimension alone adds so much to, the pain aspect of what we're talking about. What would be the driver, the motivator for Warren Buffett to have that ambition and that drive to do so much at such a young age.
Learning that really opened up my eyes as to why Warren Buffett is the way he is. What is his drive? What gets him up in the morning at 93 to go to work? What is it that drives this guy? I mean, he doesn't need to be doing this anymore. But this is what he loves. Again, I go back to the poverty effect.
Mm-hmm.
I still think he has it.
Yeah, I don't think you
It
ever,
doesn't go away.
it doesn't go away. The trauma doesn't go away. It's always there it always inserts doubt. It always creates anxiety.
Yeah, and if you go into his office, he's got pictures of the front page of the paper during the Great Depression up on the wall, the Great
So
Crash.
he keeps that reminder squarely in front of him
Yep,
of what mistakes look like. Put it bluntly,
exactly.
right? The most extreme recollection, but it's something that's dear to him because it was such a young, formative age to have grown
But
up in
yeah,
that.
my integration of entrepreneurship I thought was ideal. First of all, there weren't that many books out there that really focused on that. And if they did it topically. And that's what I got my PhD in.
Right.
And I've been an entrepreneur of 6 ventures. So it just made sense for me to go ahead and integrate that throughout the book. And I talk about just entrepreneurship in general, how anybody can be an entrepreneur. That doesn't mean you'll be successful.
Right.
But I gave them, here are the motivators for entrepreneurs. Here's some characteristics of them. This is what the most successful entrepreneurs did. And by doing that and sharing Buffett's life, I gave them somebody that they could use as a mentor indirectly, Warren Buffett, in developing their own practice or financial practice someday. Um, yeah, that was a differentiator of the book. And the biography, the most up-to-date biography, the last one was in 2009, which is a long time ago. I differentiated through the mistakes. I have a chapter on Buffett's mistakes. There's 21 of his biggest mistakes. I never saw that in another book. I added a chapter, the last chapter I did, and it took me a long time to do this, was on behavioral finance.
Right.
And I didn't, coming from a background in entrepreneurship, I didn't know that much about behavioral finance, but that's the most important thing in my opinion, in investments is behavioral finance. And if you can learn what your biases are and control them, which I have a hard time doing, uh,
Hmm.
um, that will really, really help you out. And then I apply those behavioral biases to the chapter on Warren's mistakes to try and learn what he did so we can learn about what he did. And I have a chapter on our trips to go visit him, a chapter on digital currencies, and China's way ahead of us by 10 years, by the way. It'll be interesting to see if Trump becomes president, what he's going to do with that. I have a couple chapters on the history of Berkshire Hathaway, uh, uh, and a chapter on Charlie, of course.
Right. What did it take, first of all, to get accepted into the Warren Buffett visitation with your students?
Yeah, in my book, I forgot to say, I've got 3 chapters on value investing and valuation. I give an example of Apple being the valuation. Sorry, I forgot that.
Yeah, no problem.
Uh, it was so much fun to do that with the students, and the students just loved it. Uh, I wrote this case study about Warren, and I got rejected, and I was bummed out because I got rejected. And then I thought, okay, I'll just write this case study on him. And I took 2 years during the Great Recession, and every day I would try and learn more about Warren Buffett as much as I could. And then after I got done and it got published, I said, hey, I think I could send this to Warren, and maybe he'll invite
Hmm.
us to Omaha. And so I did overnight. I packed everything up and I sent it to him overnight. And within 10 days, I got a letter in my mailbox at work with just an address in Omaha. I didn't know it was from Buffett. I opened it up, and sure enough, it was a letter from Warren Buffett saying he's inviting us in November of 2009,
Right.
the year of the Great Recession.
Right.
That And on the same weekend, he bought Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad. And all the press was following him around all day. And when we were up there with him, and he didn't want to have anything to do with them. He loves to teach.
Yeah.
He loves kids. And he has said that he would be a teacher if he wasn't doing what he's doing. So we went to 3 of his subsidiaries. We had a 2.5 hour Q&A. So I did that 3 times. I had 7.5 hours of Q&A, fresh material for the book that had not been released before. That was another reason why I wrote the book, is new material. And then we went out to lunch with him. I sat right across from him at lunch. I only had one question for him because I wrote this case study on him. How do you value a company? And he said the discounted cash flow. That was it. That was it. And I didn't believe him. And I asked him again, I go, how do you value a company? He said discounted cash flow again. So I didn't bother to ask him the third time.
I guess not. No.
Then we each took a picture with him, and a picture of all of us together with him. And, it was great. It was awesome. And the kids loved it. A lot of them still have their picture with him up on their LinkedIn profile. And I did that a couple more times, as soon as I did that, I, when I got the letter, I was dancing from him inviting us.
Yeah.
I was celebrating. It was one of the better things that have happened to me in my life, was the opportunity to go visit Warren Buffett in person. And we got on the front page of the paper, and that was great too. And I did it a couple more times, and then people started to notice what we were doing. And the board of trustee on his private jet took 3 groups of students to Omaha with me, and we went to the shareholder meeting together. And so things kind of built up. And then after I wrote the book, then I started to get invited to these conferences at the shareholder meeting. So I've done 3 last year, 2 years ago, and this past year I did 3. And then I had 2 book signings, sold out on each one.
Right.
And of course, I'm not supposed to be doing this. I'm supposed to be talking about my failures and not my successes, according to Charlie Munger.
What was the takeaway? Like you mentioned that your students, I mean, what exactly, what happened on those days with your students? Where did you go? What did you do?
We started out going to the Nebraska Furniture Mart. And for you people that don't know that much about that, that was the largest private furniture store in the country at the time. And Warren Buffett bought them out. Mrs. B was her name, on a handshake. And I knew her grandkids, her 3 grandkids.
Right. Having grown up in Omaha. Yeah.
Yeah, the Blumkins.
Right.
Ronnie.
Yeah. Rose Blumkin is
Yeah. And money and blood just not worked very good. That was an issue with that family. I don't know if it still is, but Rose was a tough cookie, I tell you. There's a great story. At this past year's shareholder meeting, I told a story about her, and great story. She came to the United States, didn't even know English, and
Yeah.
and she grew this Nebraska Furniture Mart to the largest private furniture store. Warren just showed up one day and wanted to buy it. and, he bought it from her for, I think it was 60 million or something like that.
Right.
Well,
that's another thing. I mean,
Times, which is another private company, and
the jeweler.
Of course, Buffett bought that too. That was the largest private jewelry store in the country when he bought it.
Well, that's the amazing thing, right? Is that, his philosophy on investing, it applied universally. Like he wasn't only interested in buying the shares of publicly traded companies. Very often he bought smaller businesses that were jewels as far as he was concerned. And they have stayed that way, like C's Candies, is one of his one of his early, wholly owned acquisitions. Nebraska Furniture Mart, Borsheim's, these are all these, but it's the support for the local companies that always sort of resonated, which is that, he saw these businesses in his own hometown that he could own and continue to have be managed by the founders after he acquired them. So, for them, it was a retirement plan and an opportunity to keep on doing what they love doing. And for Warren, it was the investment, and it was the goodwill in his community as well. That all the things that he wasn't trying to be something other than what he was, which always struck me.
And that's one of the beautiful things about living in a town in the Midwest, like Omaha, where the people are down to earth and humble. And he could be in Omaha instead of like New York or San Francisco, and people would leave him alone. He could go to McDonald's and get his Big Mac or whatever he
Right.
eats there, and you know, you could tell the popularity of Warren Buffett. You're going to laugh at this, by the fence at his house.
Right.
So
Right.
when I grew up, he had no fence. Even I want to say 20 years ago, no fence. Then he started to get a little bit more popular. This is like one of the richest guys in the world. He had
Right.
no fence
Yeah.
around his house.
That's right.
Anybody could just go up there. And then, a little fence started to come up. And then, the following year, a little bit stronger fence would come up. And finally, it's come to a point where you can't even see in.
As he became increasingly famous for the things that he had accomplished, and for his the very public net worth, very publicly known net worth, security had to become a concern. In the late 90s, Warren Buffett was the wealthiest man in the world, wealthiest person in the world. And I would say to my clients, there's a good chance that he will be the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest, one of the wealthiest men for the rest of his life. For as long as he's alive, he will be one of, if not the wealthiest person in the world for good. For the most part, that's been true. I mean, he's right up there in the top 10.
He's given a lot of money away, so he might have been number one.
Yeah, exactly. But I think, that's the magic. That's behind my saying that was just, it's not that, oh, Warren Buffett's going to be the richest guy forever, but it was the idea that your wealth compounds once you leave it alone and you let it, and you invest it strategically and soundly. Once you do that, you can sit back and let it work for you. And of course, manage it, but let it work for you all the same. And that's all that Warren Buffett had to do. And yes, he could tap dance into the office every day because, it's an incredibly, like, if you look at Berkshire Hathaway, as large as it is in terms of its footprint, the actual office in the Berkshire Hathaway office at Kiewit Plaza is a very small number of people relative to the size of the footprint of the company. So
you have one secretary. I'll tell you a story, a quick story.
Please.
After I wrote the book, I had all these people contacting me from all over, wanting money, wanting me to buy stuff, want all kinds of stuff. And that's little old me writing a book about Warren Buffett. Can you imagine how many people contact him every day? And he has one
Yeah,
secretary.
it's extraordinary. Like that there's only 25 people in the actual heart of Berkshire Hathaway.
There are
Yeah,
360,000 employees.
right.
This is another reason why he's an entrepreneur. So entrepreneurs hate to manage people. And so what he has done, is the Tom Murphy, Tom Murphy used to be on his board of directors and he
Right.
passed away. He uses his management style of decentralization and he leaves managers alone because he knows they don't like to be managed. Entrepreneurs don't like to be managed and micromanaged. They'll leave if
Right.
you do that. And he leaves them alone. He lets them do their thing. That way he doesn't have to manage people, which is what he hates to do. And he especially doesn't like to fire people. So he uses the Tom Murphy method of management, doing that and hiring the best people and leaving them alone. And
Right.
Phil
And
Fisher used to do that too.
yeah, and Phil Fisher was an important influence in the evolution of Warren Buffett's investment philosophy. Charlie Munger came along as well, and but so talk briefly. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the influence that Charlie Munger had, and then consequently Philip Fisher had on Warren Buffett's thinking, because I think he went from being an acolyte of Benjamin Graham, which never ended. Obviously, he was an acolyte of Ben Graham for the rest of his life. His methodology changed from Benjamin Graham's cigar butt theory and philosophy to one which focused more on quality and moats.
Which was the quality one was basically, like you said, from Phil Fisher. And Charlie kind of picked that up from Phil Fisher, I think. And Charlie really convinced him to move in that direction.
Right.
And Charlie, he had his own investment firm for like 13 years and he averaged 19.8% a year versus I think it was the S&P was up 5% a year over that period of time. And he finally gave up and, he got together with Warren in 59 and they met each other. And he eventually went full time to go work for them. And that's how Warren, he changed his whole philosophy from moving from Graham uh, to Fisher.
Mhm.
And now he's got his own thing going on in there too,
It
his
has
own life.
evolved into, yeah, it has evolved into its own. He has,
Exactly.
yeah, into his own thinking.
And I'm not so sure that we know about. People say that, oh, it's all out there, but I don't know. I'm
Yeah,
not convinced of that.
I think, I look back and, for example, like during the financial crisis, the deal that Warren Buffett made with Goldman Sachs was among one of the, among the most talked about anyway, but it was so shrewd and so like these were deals that were made on handshakes most of the time. Like, and if the terms were right, he was in there. And so, when you look at, and when you look at the terms and the timing and the depth thinking that went into that and the position that Berkshire Hathaway was in to be capable of providing, an investment bank, a lifeline on such terms during the financial crisis. At the bottom of 2009, March 9th, 2009, when the S&P 500 closed at that magical number, how many people had the fortitude to invest at the bleakest moment?
Well, Warren told us to buy in October at the end of October. I think he had an op-ed in the New York Times, I believe
Right.
it was, and I didn't buy. I should have.
Yeah.
I was thinking, well, how does he know?
But I always liked, what he had a way of simplifying the view, which is, by saying that he had the greatest faith in the United States of America and everything that it stands for. And, when I remember reading that at that moment in time and thinking, it's so easy to forget what a great system of capitalism, we have in this part of the world. And, what a great system of capitalism there is in the US, and having faith in that at a moment when there is no faith. I thought it really struck a chord. And, you know, you said something about, Warren sort of showing up in the media now at the bleakest moments, and why? Why is that? Why? And it's to that effect, right? I mean, it's the idea that he has this unwavering faith in the market. It's almost like, I always recall, like, if you've invested well, it doesn't matter if the stock market closes for 10 years.
He is very optimistic, and every year at the shareholder meeting, he always says this, that he's optimistic about the future. Exactly what you just said. He always talks about this.
Yeah, it's his faith in the system. You have an entire chapter dedicated to Warren Buffett's mistakes. What can readers learn from his mistakes?
I thought there have been a lot of books written about Warren, and I didn't see any that had a chapter on his mistakes. So I just went on a rampage trying to find his mistakes anywhere I could find them, and I kind of summarized each of the mistakes and what he did wrong, and I attempted to attribute the behavioral bias uh, to why he made that mistake so we could learn. And I talked a little bit about on each one on what we can learn from his mistake. Um, like his first mistake was buying 3 shares of city services for like 38.25 when he was 11, I believe, and then he quickly sold them. They went down and he started to sweat.
Mm-hmm.
Then they went up a little, and he sold them really quickly because some of the money was from his sister, and he
Right.
didn't want his sister to lose any money. So that was his first lesson in holding for the long term, because then it went up to like $200, and
Right.
he missed out on that. And then his next mistake was buying a gas station, a Sinclair gas station, right across the street from Texaco. And Texaco was getting all the business, and he wasn't getting the business. I think he was 21 when he did that. And
Wow.
so that was a mistake. And he learned about the power of branding on that mistake and how important that is to a business. And so, he learns from these mistakes, and I'm sure Warren, with his photographic memory, remembers, and he can bring all this stuff up. He doesn't need to write it down. He's so smart. Um, and his mistakes of omission as well. He didn't buy into Microsoft or Google. He had an opportunity to get into Google at its IPO. Intel, he was on the board of a college, and I can't remember the name of the college in Iowa. Um, uh, and he had an opportunity to get in on the IPO of Intel, and he
Right.
didn't do it. Um, there's another one in there somewhere. Amazon. Yeah. You know, Warren's funny because almost there was a while there where every time he was on TV, he was talking about how he loved Jeff Bezos and he's the best manager in the world. Yet he didn't buy any Amazon. You know, he
Yeah.
never owned any Amazon and he didn't buy any Amazon. And I'm sure it wasn't him that bought it. It was probably one of his lieutenants, Todd or Ted,
Right.
Ted Weschler. In 2019 was the first time that they bought Amazon. And so to me, those are all mistakes of omission, not commission is
Yeah.
the right word.
Yeah.
And I can go on, Walmart, he made a huge mistake by he waited for it to go down another quarter and it never did. And he missed out on millions of dollars by doing that. And Berkshire Hathaway, of course, is his biggest mistake.
Yeah, and that's kind of ironic to hear, right? I mean,
Yeah.
consider that's the namesake of his, that's still to this day the namesake of the business. What happened? What happened with Berkshire Hathaway?
Well, Berkshire was, he got out of the partnership and he asked the partners if they wanted their money back or if they wanted to continue on with Berkshire. And he owned some Berkshire initially, and then he wanted to sell his shares back to the CEO, and they agreed upon a certain price. And Buffett, I want to say, this guy came back with a letter and shorted him by like 13.5 cents or 20 cents or something really piddly per share. And it just really pissed off Warren. And Warren said, well, his dad just died like 4 days before that. And so you had the emotion, his irrationality, emotion of making a decision quickly. You could use Daniel Kahneman's book related to that. And he bought this guy out. He goes, I'm going to show him, I'm going to buy the company and I'm going to fire him.
Yeah.
For doing this. I'm going to show him a lesson.
Yeah, just because he
Can't do this to me.
Yeah.
And he was pretty young too when he did that.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly how young he was, but he was young. And so that's how he bought Berkshire. And Berkshire just sucked up money from him. It was a loser, and he refused to get rid of it, but he still has it as a reminder, I think.
Yeah.
This is what I did wrong. Every time he looks at that name, that's probably what he thinks.
That's very interesting. Yeah, he's kind of hung it around his neck.
And I want to say that mistake of buying it, he said, in today's dollars was around $5 billion. I want to say.
Right. Which is huge when you look at the opportunity cost of it all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's kind of interesting because you mentioned the poster, not the poster, but he has the 1930s newspaper hanging in his office, and he's got the name of the company. He's got the company to this day, which was his biggest mistake, squarely in front of him all the time.
Yep.
And so that seems to be, I'm sure there's many more examples of where he has carried forward, where he has carried forward his mistakes as some sort of talisman, kind of like the way people put scarecrows in their cornfields to scare away, if you surround yourself with all of your, information about and the marks of your failure, then you never forget the
One
lessons
thing
you
that
learned, right?
Warren does that's really interesting is at every shareholder meeting, he'll start out the shareholder meeting with his mistakes.
Right.
Usually
very
biggest mistake.
Well, and it resonates with the people who manage money globally because it's such a humbling business. And that sort of forthrightness and that sort of honesty, that kind of straightforward honesty about the mistakes that you made, I think that many people in the business have learned from him that that's the way to be. It's if you're not humble about what you do, or you've never had, humbling experiences, then at least you could learn from the example that Warren Buffett has set by being straightforward and upfront about the mistakes you make. And it's interesting because his good friend Bill Gates, one of my favorite quotes of Bill Gates is that failure is a better teacher than success. But just to cap off our point, I think when you consider, that Warren Buffett has surrounded himself with reminders of all his failures, it kind of closes the loop on a lot of the way he thinks and a lot of what motivates his thinking. What can go wrong, right? He's always thinking about what can go wrong. Once you get the what can go right part out of the way, you do all your analysis, you determine something's a positive, something that you could invest in. Then you have to spend probably twice as much time, if you have the time, figuring out what could go wrong now.
It's a tough business.
It's a very tough business, right? It's so tough that Warren Buffett actually makes it look easy. Because he's so good. I mean, he's so good at it. It's like watching professional athletes, right? It's like watching professional athletes. Professional athletes, if you watch, basketball, and you must be watching, I'm sure, March Madness is a very big deal at Gonzaga, right? But when you watch basketball players, if you've ever played basketball, you know how much energy is required to go up and down that court, let alone play, right? But running back and forth, and the skill and the strength and the the skill that's required, a great athlete makes their sport look easy. Armchair athletes will look at that and say critical things and be critical of professional athletes. Oh, why did he do that? Right? I remember I got into a batting cage. I had never seen a baseball come at me at 95 miles an hour. When you watch it on TV or you watch it at a game, but when it's coming at you and you're supposed to hit it with a bat and it's coming at you at 90 miles an hour, 100 miles an hour, it's a whole other game at that level. You can barely see it if you're not used to it, right? You can barely see it as the ball passes you. And for me, that's where I realized, how much I had taken for granted in professional anything.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's the mystery, that's the part that is probably impossible to unlock from somebody like Warren Buffett, is that, even if he told you, you wouldn't be able to do it.
He said, and I've heard him say this a couple times at this year's shareholder meeting. Somebody asked him a question, because there's like 13 microphones all over the arena. And so somebody got up there and they go, if I had $1 million, what would you recommend that I buy? And he said, if I had $1 million, this is what I would do. I would take an industry that I was really interested in, that I knew something about or that I was passionate about, and I would just start doing research and learning all about the industry and the companies that are in there and who had a competitive advantage and et cetera, and invest in one of the firms when their stock price went down,
Right.
back to the when you buy. But because they wanted to know how he made so much money during his partnership years. because during his partnership years, he was, I think, 31% versus the S&P, which was 9%.
Right.
And, you know, he made a lot of the money off of a couple bets, like American Express when it went down
Right.
50%. And he put 20% of the partnership money into that, and he made a boatload of money.
Yeah, and that was just in the pure investing days. But things changed dramatically when he got involved in the insurance business.
One thing about Warren Buffett that's kind of interesting, related to his personality is that when after he got done with his master's degree at Columbia, then he wanted to go work for Benjamin Graham, who had his own hedge fund on Wall Street,
Right.
and Benjamin Graham wouldn't hire him. And so he ended up going back to Omaha to work for his father's brokerage. And he did that for 4 years. But during those 4 years, what he did was he kept in contact with Graham and sent him ideas on, hedging, arbitrage ideas. And finally, after 4 years, he kept on bugging Graham to hire him. Graham finally hired him. And so to me, uh, I learned a lesson from that, a couple lessons. One was how Buffett values persistence enormously. And two, he values creativity and innovation.
Right.
So his ability not only to be persistent, but to come up with new creative ideas for Graham, those two things combined are big, big characteristics that he respects.
And he worked for Graham for some time as well, right? I mean,
Yeah, and then he went on and he did work for Graham for a couple of years, and then Graham ended up retiring, and he had an opportunity to not become the CEO of the hedge fund, but like the number two guy, and he didn't want to do that. So he went back to Omaha and he was a millionaire. You
yeah.
know, he was a millionaire and he was living in Omaha in a house for like $100 a month rent. And so he thought that what he could do is he could just go ahead and retire, uh, and live off of the dividends and the interest and capital gains off of his $1 million. And
Right.
he wouldn't have to do anything. Could sit around, take a couple college classes, read books. Of course, that didn't last very long because his family then wanted him to manage their
Yeah.
money, and that's where
Yeah.
he ended up going on and starting 7 different partnerships over
Right. That was the
several
beginning.
years.
That was the true beginning of the partnership.
Yep,
The
and he only
partnerships.
put in $100
Yeah.
into those partnerships, and I think they returned 31% versus the S&P's 9% over from 56 to 69.
And it was famously in 1969 that he announced he was going to give everybody their money back
Yep,
because he was having a hard time identifying value. That was
exactly.
the nifty 50 period, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
The I think the interesting turn comes in 1972 or 73, where he comes back. I mean, I don't think he ever left, but 1972 or 1973, that was the year of the acquisition of the insurance business.
Yeah, he got what, National Indemnity? That was his first major purchase after Geico, after he bought Geico. No, or was that Geico that he bought in 72? I think he bought Geico in like 3 different time frames.
The government employees insurance company,
Yeah,
right? Geico.
that
Yeah.
was his big thing. And Graham used to be on the board of directors of Geico.
Right.
And that's how he found out about Geico. And
Graham told him about it, right? And then,
he went down. This is more entrepreneurial behavior
yeah.
of Buffett, where he went on a Saturday on a train down to Washington, D.C., and he knocked on Geico's corporate headquarters and it was locked. And the security guard came to the door and, "Can I help you, son?" And he goes, "I'm here. I'm trying to find somebody to talk to at Geico." And there was one guy that was there. It was like the VP
Right.
at Geico, and he ended up talking to him for 5 hours that day. And he said he learned more in those 5 hours than he did in any college class. And he
Wow.
was off and running, after that 5 hour interview.
Incredible. I mean, because that has, if you, it's like, what if I had taken a right turn that day or a left turn? That's one of those formative moments in your life when you look back, what if I hadn't done that, or what if I hadn't gone there at that moment? And then, if you didn't, you'll never know what would have happened. But if you you can only know what happens if you actually acted and did it and went
You
ahead.
got to make it happen,
Yeah.
man. You can't wait for people to come to you. And Buffett knew that. What was he, 19 years old when he did that?
Same.
And he went down there and he had the audacity to go
Yeah.
knock on their door. Crazy.
The discovery of, the free float from the insurance business was probably a part of the investing, prowess and growth of Berkshire Hathaway that most people probably overlooked because they didn't understand that the insurance business was funneling huge amounts of premium, payments into the company via, holdings like Geico.
And he would use that to purchase companies.
Right. So he wasn't reliant on investors giving him money or growing the portfolio organically within Berkshire Hathaway. He was getting all this new money that was coming in through the float. And then he had a whole bunch of other problems to think about as well, like super catastrophe, reinsurance. If you read through the letters,
cyber insurance, that's the big
Right.
thing nowadays.
Absolutely. And when you it's that complexity that he's keeping track of is more revealing of what's unknown within Berkshire Hathaway, the inner workings of it, and the amount of people that will probably eventually have to be brought on in order to replace Warren Buffett. It does leave a big question as to, what happens when he passes.
Somebody asked a question about that again at this year's meeting at one of my conferences. I was on a panel at the Gabelli conference, and somebody asked, are they going to be okay when Warren leaves? Who's going to take over? Da 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 da. And our consensus really was they're going to be okay. Everybody that I've talked to loves Abel.
Right.
Both the employees and the people on the outside and investors, they all have nothing but respect for this guy. So I would have no problem investing with Berkshire after a little bit after he passed away. And, who knows how much it's going to go down. I don't know, 5%, 7%. Maybe it'll go up. I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I would imagine it would go down. But he's got that team, Ajit Jain. He's great. He loves Ajit Jain.
Right.
Todd and Ted, from what I can tell, they're underperforming the S&P 500. From what I've heard.
Right.
I can't say that with certainty. A little bit they're underperforming. And Todd ended up going to be the CEO of Geico. So he's doing that, and he's managing money. But now Greg, when Warren passes away, he's going to be in charge of everything. He's going to be in charge of capital allocation. He's going to be in charge of Todd and Ted and their investment. Right. He's the man. And the question is can he do what Warren Buffett does with all these acquisitions and valuations? And I'm sure Warren's trying to teach him as much as possible, but there's no way anybody's going to replace Warren.
My suspicion is that he's already doing it. Like they're doing it together, right?
I would think so.
Yeah, Abel and Buffett are acting together, and Buffett is informing Abel where he needs to, where he does, and Abel is probably informing Buffett. I don't think I just don't get the sense that Warren Buffett would leave that to chance or leave that to time. I mean, there's not much, you can't at the age at the age of 93, 94, you're not thinking long term anymore in terms of your own life, but multi-generationally, it's probably being baked in for a long time, right? So you're probably it probably is going to be, and for the best interest of investors, it's probably going to be anticlimactic.
I did mention that, it does Craig Abel have this entrepreneurial personality to do these things? Because Warren, most people don't even think Warren's an entrepreneur.
Right.
Most people don't even know what entrepreneurship is, by the way. They think it's starting a business, but in all actuality, it's seeking opportunity, utilizing creativity and innovation. So I think Warren, under those definitions, is definitely an entrepreneur. If you just define it as starting a company, then no, he's a capital allocator. But if he's looking for deals all the time, and that's very entrepreneurial. And then once he does look for deals, he structures them different, and that's entrepreneurial. So I don't know what word you want to use for that. Some new technical word. A lot of people gave me crap a long time ago for saying that Warren Buffett was an entrepreneur.
For a long time before this added dimension, obviously they viewed him as very wise and very adept at investing, but might have just thought he's a machine, like this is just something that's just built into him. But it's just not true. Like, I mean, if you read a lot of other books or stories, a lot of bios on Warren Buffett just go into, the returns, the success, the growth of his stock, his success as an investor. But it doesn't really go into the full, the full depth of his mindset. I love, by the way, that you teach entrepreneurship.
Thanks.
I absolutely love that. I think it's one of those areas that is in such, short supply. People take it for granted. You mentioned in another conversation you had that you had your PhD in entrepreneurship, but there was only two universities that had programs where you could possibly become a professor.
Yeah, one of them was Penn.
Yeah.
And in 1989, when I applied, their tuition was $40,000 in 89, which would put it at what today? Like,
right. I mean, something
I wouldn't have been able to afford to go there, even if I got in.
Yeah.
So I was lucky. I picked a field that it was going to explode, which I had no idea. And I only picked it because that's what my passion was.
Well, today, now in in today's era of choose yourself and the internet and e-commerce, everybody wants to be an entrepreneur.
I don't blame them.
No, of course not. It's entrepreneurism is exciting if you can, find the right opportunities and then realize them, make them real. To my mind, that's a great subject to teach. That must be, I mean, I'm assuming it's a lot of fun for you. It involves a great deal of critical thinking. That's something that's in short supply too.
I
Nobody
read
likes
an
to-
article yesterday, somebody interviewing Mark Zuckerberg from Meta, and he said the number one skill that they're looking for are people with a high level of critical thinking.
Yeah.
And he said you don't even need a college degree.
I mean, I think that's always been true, but I think it's even harder today because people are so distracted. We're so, things are, nobody likes to read. A lot of people they don't devote the time to reading. And that's another thing when you read, when you read stories about Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett is known for digesting 500 pages a day. He's known for, it's not that he's sitting there reading all 500 pages, but he's going through 500 pages of literature every day and absorbing whatever he can from it.
And Charlie says he's a book with four legs.
What is the best advice you've ever received, or for that matter, given?
Well, I already told you to stay away from toxic people and toxic situations.
Yeah,
That was
I wholeheartedly
Charlie.
Agree. That's fantastic advice.
But one that's sort of related to what Warren says, hang around with people that are better than you, but I don't like to really position it like that. I position it like hang around with people that love you, that care about you, that want you to be successful. And if they're not on your side, basically is what I'm saying, is why do you need to hang around with them? Unless they're your boss. At work, you have to be there.
Yeah.
And
You have
then
a choice.
you should be looking for an exit.
Absolutely. Well, I would urge everybody that's listening, pick up a copy of Dr. Todd Finkle's book. It's a great read. It's a very enjoyable read. There's so much to uncover in there that you might not have uncovered in previous Warren Buffett biographies, and it's available everywhere you buy books. Dr. Finkle, thank you again.
Best wishes.